Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house here assembled, for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen. Amen. Namaste.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Speaker.
Honourable members, I have received communication from the following. The Honourable Camille Robinson Regis, MP, member for Aruka Maloney, has requested leave of absence for the period March 8 to 17, 2019. Dr. Fuad Khan, MP, member for Barataria San Juan, has requested leave of absence for the period March 8 to 16, 2019. The Honourable Kamla Prasad Bisesa, SC, MP, member for Siparia, Mrs. Christine Nwalo Hussain, MP, member for Kamuta, Manzanilla, Mr. Rodney Charles, MP, member for Naparima, and Mr. Prakash Ramadan, MP, member for St. Augustine, have requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the members seek is granted. And honourable members, I wish to advise that we have in the gallery today the students from the Asha Boys School, particularly the Beaton Club. Thank you.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers.
The Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honour to lay the following papers. 1. The audited financial statements of the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2018. 2. The audited financial statements of the Tourism Trinidad Destination Management Company Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2018. 3. The report of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to the progress of the proposals to restructure CLICO, BAT, and CIB for the quarter ended December 31st, 2018. I beg to move that papers 1 and 2 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee.
Honourable members, the question is that papers 1 and 2 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I have the honour to lead the following papers. The ministerial responses to the 21st report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the Chaguaramas Development Authority for the financial years 2008 to 2014. The ministerial responses are from the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Planning and Development. Madam Speaker, I also have the honour to lay the ministerial response of the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries to the 12th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination of disaster relief in Trinidad and Tobago. Also, Madam Speaker, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries to the second report of the Joint Select Committee on Foreign Affairs on an inquiry into regional integration and the strengthening of CARICOM institutions. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Minister of Rural Development and Local Government.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government, I have the honor to lay the administrative report of the Arima Borough Corporation for the period 2016 to 2017. Thank you very much.
Reports from committees.
Member from Diego Martin, North East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honor to present the interim report of the Joint Select Committee appointed to consider and report on the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority Bill 2018.
Prime Minister's questions, urgent questions.
Member for Urupuch West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of National Security, in light of the recently issued U.S. Level 2 travel advisory on crime and terrorism, with respect to this country, could the Minister inform this House of the urgent measures to be taken by the government to address this advisory?
The Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I was commenting to those on my side of the bench that it appears as though newspapers haven't reached the Urupuch West and East today. Madam, with your questions to the Minister to come. Madam Speaker, with respect to the U.S. travel advisory, as we have been at pains to say over the last 24 hours, there has been no change to the U.S. travel advisory to Trinidad and Tobago. And in fact, when you do a comparison, which is what you need to do when you're looking at these travel advisories, you would see that they've used the same language that they used previously. Immediately upon seeing the travel advisory, I was in contact with the United States Embassy in Port of Spain, telling them the issue that we had in particular with respect to the terrorism or the terrorist threat, the attack, part of the advisory. And as they responded, whilst they acknowledged that there is no intelligence to support it, it is boilerplate language when you look at the advisories for Europe and other countries. They have the similar type language, but we are in the process of discussing it with them. And I'd like to say at this stage that we continue to have absolutely no intelligence with respect to any attacks. We are working assiduously along with all of our foreign allies in this area, and we will continue to do the work that we're doing. And as we have seen in some of these international countries, they have suffered, including the United States, unfortunate terrorist attacks over the past few years, and it is something that no country wants to have to face. We will continue to do what it is we need to do to keep our citizens safe and secure.
Member for Urupuch West.
Honourable Minister, certain areas have been identified, like sea lots and coconut and so. What is this government doing to address that situation?
Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, it is well known throughout Trinidad and Tobago that there are some areas that it would not be advisable for persons to go on frequent. I mean, it's the same thing once again with every international country, every metropolitan city in the world. London, New York, Chicago, all of these areas. There are some areas where persons are best advised not to visit. So that is what the US, in their assessment of it, have declared, and they've told their citizens that they should not visit these areas.
Supplemental member for Urupuch West.
Sir, the question is, I'm asking what you all are doing to ameliorate this.
I am laughing because it shows that they not only don't have newspapers, but they don't have access to the television as well. Because in the past month, what has happened is the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, on the basis of intelligence, have led a number of intelligence-led operations into some of these identified areas. And they have, as the whole population has seen, had success. They have brought persons in for questioning. They have charged certain persons. The police will continue to run their operations based on intelligence, along with the support of the other arms of national security, something that was not previously done.
Member for Urupuch West.
To the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, in light of increasing incidents of robberies and vandalism, most recently the robbery at the Palo Seco Heritage Sports Club on February 28, 2019, Could the minister indicate the urgent measures implemented to secure the assets of Heritage Petroleum Company Limited?
Energy Industries.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Heritage Sports Club at Palaseco was in fact broken into on February 28. The bandits got away with just a few bottles of alcohol. Since December of last year, when the restructuring of Petrotrin took place, the security contract was awarded to Amalgamated to secure the sites, in particular, of Garacara's refinery assets at Pointe-à-Pied, Paria terminal and assets at Pointe-à-Pied, and the widespread heritage assets, largely located in the Southwest Peninsula. They have support from the Defense Force, which is still on the ground with the amalgamated security forces, especially on the heritage sites. Priority is obviously given to the strategic sites, the sites that win oil and produce oil, which is the oil field assets and the refinery assets and the terminaling assets. The clubs and the housing areas have been shut down. There is some guarding facilities and security patrols visit areas frequently, but there are still certain security gaps in that system, and we will continue to monitor it and look at it and increase the security patrol system. But I want to call on the communities of Palaseco and the Southwest Peninsula. These are your assets, okay? And the whole corporate social responsibility issue will start to take precedent in the coming months. Protect the assets. The assets are your oil fields, your pipelines, your installations, and the housing and or club assets that we will allocate to service the community in these areas. I thank you.
Fremantle, member for Urubuch East.
Thank you very much. Minister, given the comprehensive reply on securing the assets of Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, could you indicate whether or not at this time Heritage Petroleum Company Limited is funding Paria Trading Company to import fuel into the country for the domestic market?
I will allow that as a supplemental question. Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable Minister, you just indicated that the persons in the community ought to be custodians of the company's assets. Did you have any consultation with the community with respect to that obligation that you are placing on them?
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Yes, we did. There was the conversation with the Prime Minister. The Member of Parliament for Labrie and for Point 14 is actively engaged in the community. I was personally at the conversation because I represented the Prime Minister because he was at the CARICOM heads meeting, and we have engaged the community. I have worked in this area all my career, and I know the ground, and we are actively engaged in dealing with the community. And
Supplemental, member for Caroni East.
Honourable Minister, could you give us an idea of the human resource personnel capacity provided by Amalgamated to secure all these vast areas for protection?
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
regretfully, I don't have the exact head count of the amalgamated force, but that could be provided shortly.
Member for Urubuch East.
Next question. Yeah. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Question number 3 to the Minister of Finance. Given the estimated cost to repair the Caribbean Airlines ATR 72 aircraft that recently sustained damage at the Piarco International Airport, could the Minister state whether an independent investigation will be conducted in order to determine responsibility for the incident?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As was stated at the press conference after Cabinet yesterday, which was fully reported in the newspapers today, all 3 daily newspapers, all radio stations, all television stations, the Trinidad and Tobago Civil Aviation Authority, an independent institution, has commenced an independent investigation into the accident. Caribbean Airlines is conducting its own investigation using its internal process. And by way of additional information, Madam Speaker, all of Caribbean Airlines aircraft are fully insured so that the majority of the cost to repair the aircraft to return it to a serviceable state will be covered by insurance. The only loss would be the usual deductible on the typical insurance policy of this time.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank the Minister for making those comments on the record as opposed to a press briefing. Could the Minister indicate the composition of that independent inquiry, the nature of the committee, the names of the persons who will be investigating this matter?
Minister of Finance.
I'm in no position to indicate who at the Trinidad and Tobago Civil Aviation Authority is conducting an inquiry. I will certainly get that information. And in addition, I will get the information with respect to Caribbean Airlines. But I don't have it with me at present. No.
Member for Chaguanas East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Honourable Minister, could you indicate whether the manufacturers will be a part of this investigating team, ATR?
Minister of Finance.
I cannot say, but I would think that Caribbean Airlines would most certainly consult with the manufacturers to determine their view on what caused the accident and also what should be done to bring the aircraft back to a serviceable state.
Member for Oropuch East.
Could I have a supplemental?
No, I believe the two supplementals have been exhausted.
Question number 4, Madam Speaker. Could the Minister indicate the cause of the recent crash involving the Caribbean Airlines ATR 72 aircraft at the Piaco International Airport?
Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, firstly, let me correct a misstatement in the question. It was not a crash. The aircraft was being taxied by an engineer from the ramp to the hangar. And during that taxiing operation, the aircraft collided with the wall of the terminal building. So it was not a crash. There were no passengers on the aircraft. The aircraft was not in service at the time. As I said yesterday, Madam Speaker, as I said yesterday, the causes, Madam Speaker, it's very difficult to answer this question with the member for Caroni East just grumbling. So I will start again, Madam Speaker. I will start again. It is, as I said yesterday, there could be many causes for this accident. Preliminary reports indicate that the braking system was not functional at the time. However, these are just preliminary reports, and it would be irresponsible to speculate at this time on the actual cause of the accident until all of the investigations are completed.
Supplemental member for Oropuch East.
Thank you very much. To the Minister of Finance, can the Minister of Finance indicate a timeline within which such an investigation will be undertaken and completed?
Minister of Finance.
I'm unable to give that timeline, but I can assure you it will be done in the shortest possible time.
Member for Chaguanas East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Honourable Minister, based on what you have indicated, is it normal for an engineer to taxi an aircraft in this hour of the night?
Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I cannot answer that question with any precise detail. However, I can say that the particular individual who was taxiing the aircraft was trained to do so by ATR at its headquarters in Toulouse in France. This is the information given to me, I'm advised, by Caribbean Airlines as to whether that particular individual was certified to taxi at that particular time of night. I cannot say, but I will certainly find out.
Questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there are 15 questions for oral answer, and the government will be answering all 15 questions. Thank you very much.
Might I inquire about the written questions?
Oh, pardon. There are 2 questions for written, 61 and 62. An answer for 61 has been tabled, and an answer for 62, we ask for a 2-week deferral. Thank you very much.
The deferral is granted. Question, member for Barataria Sanwan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the member for Barataria Sanwan, Question number 83 to the Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, before I give the answer, I'd just like to acknowledge the students of the ASJA boys. No, I went to Northeastern College, Standing Ground. Thank you. Madam Speaker, any information with regard to the apprehension of drivers and charge for the use of private vehicles as taxis is not available at the licensing office and may have to be sourced from the statistics from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Works and Transport is not considering the registration of private vehicles for hire at this time. This is a complex issue that involves in-depth considerations for matters such as the need for insurance for passengers, drivers, and property, background checks on drivers in terms of their suitability to operate public transport vehicles, which routes would be appropriate for PH drivers in the context of existing maxi-taxi systems, and so on. Thank you.
Member for Barataria Sanwan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 84 to the Minister of Finance on behalf of the member for Barataria.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Part A of the question answer. Currently, passengers pay the change fee for domestic flights via the Caribbean Airlines website, the Caribbean Airlines ticketing offices, the Caribbean Airlines call center, and the ticketing counters at the Piarco and A&R Robinson International Airports. These payment methods provide a secure environment for the collection of the change fee and allow for the efficient cancellation and rebooking of seats so as to ensure that seating capacity is maximized. With respect to Part B, Caribbean Airlines did consider the use of vouchers. However, this is not supported by their current check-in system. CAL is presently working on an alternate system for the processing of the change fee. This system will allow customers to pay the change fee at the check-in counter using a credit card, as well as allow passengers to pay the change fee using the CAL mobile app up until the check-in for the flight at the check-in counter. Passengers that cannot access the CAL mobile app or do not have access to a credit card can still pay the change fees using cash or debit card via the Caribbean Airlines website, ticketing offices, call center, and ticketing counters at the Piarco and A&R Robinson International Airports. The new system, together with other service initiatives, the one I just referred to, the application, the Caribbean Airlines mobile app, are targeted for rollout during the first and second quarters of 2019.
Supplemental, member for Chaguanas East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Honourable Minister, are you in a position to indicate how much money has been accrued to Caribbean Airlines as a result of this change fee initiative?
Minister of Finance.
I don't have that information.
Member for Barataria Sanwan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, on behalf of the member for Barataria San Juan, question number 85 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the current prison visitation system does not allow for persons under the age of 16 to visit anyone who is incarcerated. This is governed by the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service General Order number 88 of 2015, policy, visits and visitors to prison establishments. However, special arrangements can be made to facilitate children visiting the prison. The grant of these special visits falls solely under the discretion and remit jurisdiction of the Commissioner of Prisons. The Commissioner of Prisons looks at each application and each request on a case-by-case basis and examines the circumstances surrounding each one of these requests, and very frequently grants the permission for persons under the age of 16 to visit someone who is incarcerated.
Member for Oropouche West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 88 to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, at this time, there is no change being envisioned in the retail price of super gasoline, that is 192. In February 2019, officials of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries met with officials of the Fisheries Division of the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries to discuss the logistical changes that the fishing community may have had to adapt to access fuels following the cessation of the supply of regular gas. The next step, the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries and the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries would meet with the fishing community at a venue to be determined to discuss one-on-one the concerns of the fishermen, and we will try our best to facilitate within reason what they bring to the table, bearing in mind that there will be no change in the price of super. And at this point in time, until the refinery gets an operator, we cannot import regular gasoline 183.
Supplemental member for Faisalabad.
Minister, for that update. Can you perhaps commit to a time frame for that meeting to take place?
Minister of Energy and Energy Industry.
I can't commit to a time frame today, but I have to obviously hold discussions with the Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries, because the Fisheries Department falls with him. I am just speaking from the fuel aspect of it. But I think it will be a joint effort between both of us. He will advise us to the venue and the type of staffing that we will take to the meeting. But the meeting is a government commitment.
Member for Caroni East.
Is there a fixed policy of the government and the ministry to keep the price of the super gas constant rather than with the international scenario when the price drops? Is there any possibility of adopting a policy to engage that?
Minister of Energy and Energy Industry.
That policy largely falls under the remit of the Minister of Finance in consultation with the Minister of Energy. The Minister of Finance did indicate 2 budgets ago that we are looking at that. But there's a sting in the tail in that. While the price of crude can go down and will affect the retail price of fuel, it can also go up. So there's a balancing act that you have to play. Because if you flow the system in its entirety, there can be dire consequences in the event of a high oil price.
Member for Oropuch West.
Thank you. Question number 89 to the Attorney General.
The Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, with respect to Part A of the question, as to whether any of the cases left by former Chief Magistrate Marcia Ayres Caesar have been restarted, the Office of the Attorney General has been advised that a number of unfinished cases previously under the remit of the former Chief Magistrate Ayres Caesar have in fact been restarted. According to information provided by the judiciary, approximately 36 matters were started de novo, meaning afresh, by the current Chief Magistrate, and those have already been completed. The remaining matters which have not yet been completed were delayed as a result of persons choosing to challenge that process under what is now referred to as the interpretation summons matter. That has, of course, come to an end. With respect to B, this is a matter within the jurisdiction of the High Court. In that context, the Office of the Attorney General has been advised by the judiciary that further inquiries are being made to determine whether any party has sought and received compensation for damages to date, and if any information indicating that claims for damages were or are being undertaken in relation to the Magistrates' Court's matters. The Office of the AG will, of course, be provided with those in due course. As soon as this information becomes available, it, of course, can be provided. With respect to Part C of the question, any further delays in the completion of cases would be as a direct consequence of the accused persons exercising their constitutional right under the interpretation summons. These matters were originally dispersed to various other magistrates to adjudicate upon, but were then stymied by the interpretation summons. In these circumstances, there's nothing further beyond that of normal court protocol and procedure. I must add, Madam Speaker, as is contained in the judgment of Madam Justice Carol Gobin, who determined the interpretation summons, it is not lost upon me that the vast majority of persons who chose to challenge the interpretation summons route and avoid the restarting of cases were in fact represented by attorneys at law sitting on the UNC bench. So these people have unwittingly found themselves in a queue as a result of the advice received by some of my colleagues opposite.
Supplemental member for Urupuch West.
Honorable Attorney General, you said there are several remaining matters. Is any consideration being given to have these matters listed as priority so that they can be expedited through the courts as priority, before the register listed as priority?
Attorney General.
That would be a matter for the judiciary entirely in respect of the docketing of systems. From the government's perspective, all that we can say is that we're the first government in the history of Trinidad and Tobago to have introduced criminal proceedings rules. Those criminal proceedings rules are dynamite to logjam. We are also the first government to have introduced the robust system of maximum sentence indication in matters. In that regard, it's not lost upon me. Some 400 matters were dealt with in 1 month by one judge. We're the first government to introduce judge-only trials, something that my learned colleagues opposite said would never see the light of day, especially for murder matters. It is not lost upon me that the first judge-only trial was successfully completed with an acquittal with written reasons. So we are confident that we are taking every step to break historical trends in this country, and we're sure that the judiciary will take its part in serious measure as well.
Supplemental member for Urupuch West.
Attorney General, since you are breaking historical trends, do you think it is right and the right moment now that Section 137 of the Constitution should be invoked?
Allow that as a question. Member for Urupuch West.
Thank you. Question 90 to the Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank the member for the question. Madam Speaker, in response to 90A, this is a milling facility. It's not really a production facility, so that the quantity that is milled at the Carlson Field Rice Mill is dependent upon the paddy that is received. It's not the only rice mill in the country, and whatever is received would be milled there. In relation to 90B, this mill is operated by National Flour Mills, the owner of the facility. And in relation to 90C, the government does in fact plan to sell the rice mill. It has been the subject of an open RFP process by National Flour Mills, and that process is ongoing with negotiations with the preferred bidder. Thank you.
Supplemental member for Urupuch West.
Honorable Minister, how many tenders you have thus far to purchase the rice mill?
Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Madam Speaker, I'm not in a position to answer that question in relation to the number of tenders.
Supplemental member for Urupuch West.
Well, Minister, you said according to the paddy received, you determine the milling capacity. Rice farmers have said that 60% of the panicle that goes to the NFM is grade A. But it comes out as, I have to preface my question, sir. It comes out.
One minute. Remember, you have 15 seconds to ask the question. Okay, please.
So what happens, Honorable Minister, that a grade A panicle comes out as pet rice? What happens in that process in NFM?
Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Madam Speaker, as I said at the start, this is a milling facility. It receives paddy from the farmers. The output from the milling facility is almost entirely dependent on the quality of the input at the facility. So whatever is grade A, B, or C is entirely dependent on what comes in the form of paddy. Thank you.
Member for Chaguanas East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Question number 96 to the Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. New applications for the Senior Citizens Pension are processed after all supporting documents related to the requirements are submitted to the local Public Assistance Board. The following measures are in place or being undertaken to facilitate expeditious processing of applications. 1, restructuring of the division. The ministry is currently working with the Ministry of Public Administration to restructure the Social Welfare Division. This will include the division's staffing, structure, process reengineering, and establishment of detailed performance standards for grant processing. 2, automation of processes of the division. By April 2019, the ministry will launch the Social Services Client Management System. This system, which was developed by the ministry's Information Technology Unit, will automate several of the processes related to grant administration, thereby reducing the turnaround time for processing of applications. 3, information and sensitization. The ministry has been actively engaging the national population through our corporate communication and education unit on the various services of the ministry and the requirements for same. This has taken the form of brochures, information published on the ministry's website, as well as the public information and education series and outreach initiative of the ministry. These sessions assist the public in understanding what is required to access the services of the ministry and to reduce the delays due to inadequate submission of relevant documentation. Strategic MOUs with stakeholders. The ministry has entered into 2 strategic memoranda of understanding with IGov-TT and the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago. IGov, through its Connect offices located throughout Trinidad and Tobago, will provide assistance to senior citizens prior to and throughout the application process for the senior citizens pension to ensure that accurate and complete information is received. IGov-TT will also accept applications on behalf of the ministry. Additionally, this partnership will afford our senior citizens greater flexibility and ease of doing business given the extended opening hours of IGov-TT. The MOU with NIBTT facilitates the timely sharing of information necessary for the processing of applications. Madam Speaker, it is anticipated that these initiatives, working in tandem, will see a significant reduction in the turnaround time for the processing of the senior citizen pension. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Shogunus, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Honourable Minister, could you say what is that turnaround time as we speak?
Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Madam Speaker, we work with a turnaround time currently of 3 months. However, there are instances based on documents required, particularly where applicants have to go to the Immigration Department. It sometimes takes longer.
Member for Shogunus East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Question number 97 to the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government.
Minister of Rural Development and
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government, the answer is the government is fully committed to fulfilling its promise of local government reform and intends to table legislation to reform local government in Parliament within the current 4th session of the 11th Parliament upon approval of the legislation by the Cabinet. In this context, Madam Speaker, a draft bill entitled Miscellaneous Provisions Local Government Reform Bill 2019 was submitted by the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government to Cabinet for its review and approval in January 2019, and the review process is almost complete. Subsequent to the approval of Cabinet, the relevant legislation will be introduced in Parliament. I thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Shogunus East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Honourable Minister, do you have a timeline as to when this review will be completed and be brought to Parliament?
Minister of Rural Development and Local Government.
The review and the laying, as the answer said, will be completed and the draft bill will be laid within the current 4th session of the 11th Parliament. So that is the time frame we are working with. I can't at this time give an exact day or date, but it will be laid within the current 4th session of the 11th Parliament. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Member for Shogunus East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question 98 to the Minister of Public Administration.
Minister of Public Administration.
Thank you kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the current number of outstanding industrial relations matters yet to be settled with the Public Services Association is 31. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Shogunus East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Honourable Minister, could you say how long these matters have been outstanding?
Minister of Public Administration.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, at this point, I do not have the response, but I can provide it at the shortest possible time.
Member for Couva North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 104 to the Minister of Health.
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Answer to Part A. The commencement of construction of the second phase of the Central Block, Port of Spain General Hospital, is predicated on the finalization of Phase 1, which is expected to be completed by the third quarter of 2019. And for information, Phase 1 comprises as follows: the relocation of central stores, engineering and biomedical departments at the Port of Spain General Hospital, Phase 1. This project is the first phase for the redevelopment of Central Block. Key Shannona Limited was awarded a contract by UDCOT with a budget of $25 million. The works comprise the following: the design and construction of a new building to house the central stores, engineering and biomedical departments. These are services and employees who are currently located within the southern section of the compound, an area which was earmarked for the construction of the new Central Block building. Once the building is completed in August 2019, then the members and staff of the respective services would be relocated accordingly. Following the relocation of staff and services, the contractor will conduct the demolition of the existing structures, making way for the new building and for the other contractor, Shanghai Construction Group, to commence their own on-site activities for Phase 2, the new Central Block building. Madam Speaker, notwithstanding items 2 and 3 above, the NWRHA has been advised that the works by SGC Limited may commence sooner, that is, by May 2019. Part 2, the refurbishment of Costard Building, Shanghai Construction Group was awarded a contract by UDCOT, and the contract price is $24.8 million. The works comprise the following: the refurbishment of the ground floor to accommodate 48 beds, along with clinical and non-clinical support services, the refurbishment to the first floor to accommodate 40 beds, along with clinical and non-clinical support services, the refurbishment of a portion of the second floor to accommodate nurses' common areas and staff washrooms, all common areas required by staff, and the occupancy shall be for medical wards. The refurbishment of the first floor of the St. James District Health Facility, China Railway Construction Group, contract was awarded by UDCOT at a contract price of $32.8 million. The works comprise the following: the construction of an operating theater suite inclusive of all clinical and non-clinical support areas, a male ward to accommodate 35 beds, a female ward to accommodate 30 beds, 4 isolation beds, all common areas, and the occupancy shall also be for surgical wards. The approval of Cabinet to refit the Costard Building and St. James Hospital for patients for the Central Block was obtained on the 24th of January, 2019. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Couva North.
Thank you. Minister, when are works scheduled to be completed for the retrofitting of the Costard Building and the St. James Hospital?
Minister.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, those works were design build. The design phase is complete, and we expect the actual construction works to start within the next week or two. And the total time frame for both Costard and St. James is 3 to 4 months. Madam Speaker, there's one thing else I want to put on the table as far as Central Block is concerned. The Central Block is a $1 billion investment, and I want to rebut and correct the Hansard of 22nd of February, where the member for Princestown said $1 billion without
Madam
equipment
Speaker, that's
and
not
without
part of the
being
question.
fully
Madam
furnished.
Speaker,
Madam Speaker,
on a point of order, this.
Member for point of prayer. Is there a standing order you wish to raise?
In context, the minister's response has nothing to do with the question that was laid, Madam Speaker. He's talking about Hansard that has passed.
Overruled.
Madam Speaker, the member for Princestown, where untruths slip so easily from his lips, said 1 billion.
Member for St. Joseph, I'd advise you to take another track. Member for Caroni East. All right? I will not allow that kind of blurting out and that sort of unparliamentary language. I know you're capable of much better than that. St. Joseph.
Madam Speaker, it was said in this chamber that $1 billion for the central block without equipment and without being fully furnished. Madam Speaker, the central block will be equipped with an MRI, 2 CT scanners, bone density testing machine, 2 X-ray labs, cath lab, fully equipped 10 operating theaters, 10 ICUs, 10 HDUs, fully equipped coronary care unit, internal medicine, hematology, psychiatry, general surgery, urology, orthopedics, radiology, labs, plastics, etc. I want to put on the record again, because if people listen to Princestown, you will leave with the impression that $1 billion is not purchasing equipment. Nothing could be further from the truth. And we must correct that untruth. Thank you very much.
Supplemental.
Thank you. To the Honourable Minister of Health. Minister of Health, are you also aware that a lot of equipment is at the Covert Children's Hospital doing nothing, and the Covert Children's Hospital, which your government has failed to operationalize?
That is a supplementary question. Member for Faisabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Minister, with regards to your response to the first part of the question, could you indicate whether that relocation will be on a permanent basis and whether it will be within the compounds of the Port Spain, whether the relocation of the stores and so on, phase 1, would be on a permanent basis, and whether it's within the compound of the Port Spain Hospital?
Thank you. That's an excellent question, and the answer is yes. We are moving them from the site earmarked for the new central block to another site, which is phase 1, which is currently under construction, and that move will be a permanent move. So we are building permanent structures. Even though we didn't have to build central block, if you are familiar with the compound, the buildings that currently house those departments are derelict and have serious OSH issues. So whether we were building a new central block or not, in the interest of safety, we had to move those departments. So those departments being moved are just to the southeast of the A&E, and they will be moved to the north of the A&E. Those works, which were awarded to Keisha Nona for $25 million, have already begun. Concrete slabs have been laid, so the verticals will start to go up very soon. And those works are due to be finished by September 2019, all things being equal. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Caroni East.
Minister, would you consider it appropriate for the demolition of the central block to take place with patients in nearby wards very close to the proposed demolition site? What would you do with those patients?
Minister of Health.
I was looking for a synonym for the word hypocritical, and the synonym is insincere. Madam Speaker, I am amazed. I continue to be amazed by the interest of the opposition in Central Block. Because you paid no interest. You paid no interest from 2010 to 2015. Now that we are paying attention to Central Block to ensure the safety of patients, visitors, healthcare workers, I am amazed at the interest now being shown by the opposition. When you had the levers of power, you did nothing. You did nothing. So we will do everything to construct a new central block, to demolish. If you know where the Costard building is, and if you know where St. James is.
Member for St. Joseph. Member for Caroni East. if you wish to ask a further supplemental question, I'm sure there's one more. All right? In the meantime, I would just ask you to restrain yourself. Member for St. Joseph.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, as I said, it is insincere of the opposition to now ask about Central Block when they sat on a seismic report for 5 years and did nothing. We are doing something to ensure the safety of patients, visitors, and healthcare workers, and now they have a plethora of questions. We will do everything possible to ensure the continued safety of staff, patients, and visitors. As I said, a synonym for hypocritical is insincere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My question to the Minister, I'm looking for a synonym for misleading. Madam Speaker, could I ask the Minister, are you aware that the last government, the partnership, had made advanced progress with the government of the United Kingdom and related companies to the government to construct an entire hospital complex in Port of Spain that was not one building standing up in the sky, but an entire complex of several facilities, and that had advanced by 2015. And please do not mislead the country like this.
Member, what is the question? I heard about 2 questions.
I'm not hearing you clearly. I don't know if there's a problem with the sound system. I'm asking the Minister, are you aware that advances were made and progress made for an entire hospital complex in Port of Spain?
Minister of
You're either
Health.
aware or you're not.
Mr. Health.
Absolutely not. What I am aware of is that my colleague opposite did not touch a blade of grass, did not turn over a shovel of cement to start the construction of a central block, which was condemned by a PAHO report, condemned by a Aaron Bush report, and other reports that clearly said Central Block posed a risk to life and limb. And my colleagues, Madam Speaker, that is a block with over 400 patients, medical staff, visiting hours. You could have a catastrophe of over 2,000 people at full population, and you did nothing for 5 years. We are doing something now. And I am amazed again, Madam Speaker, by the insincerity and sudden rush of love for Central Block. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Member for Couva North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 105 to the Minister of Tourism.
Minister of Tourism.
Very much, Madam Speaker. Over the period July 2018 to December 2018, 211,950 tourists visited Trinidad and Tobago. The data is collected from the Immigration Division of Trinidad and Tobago, the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, and the Tobago House of Assembly. The data reflects all ports of entry, including air and cruise arrivals to Trinidad and Tobago.
Supplemental, Member for Couva. Member for Couva North.
Thank you. Question number 106 to the Minister of Tourism.
Minister of Tourism.
Thank you very much. Again, Madam Speaker. In Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, the cruise season runs from November to April of the subsequent year. Trinidad and Tobago received 19 cruise calls for November and December 2018. Of these, 10 ships visited Trinidad, while Tobago received 9 for the same period. No ships arrived outside the season during July to October 2018. International cruise passenger arrivals for November and December 2018 totaled 28,344, of which 20,765 were cruise passengers to Trinidad and 7,579 were cruise passengers to Tobago.
Member for Urupuch East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, question number 108 to the much more honorable and decent Attorney General.
The Attorney General.
I thank the Honourable Speaker for this opportunity to answer. Perhaps the Honourable Member means I'm much more honourable today. I take it that way. I don't know otherwise. All my colleagues are honourable on this side. Madam Speaker, further to a paper entitled Breakdown of Expenses to the Commission of Inquiry into the Failure of CL Financial, Colonial Life Insurance Company, Clico Investment Bank, Hindu Credit Union, Cooperative Society, laid in this House on 9th December 2016, I am able to report as follows. Cost of professional fees foreign services in the period 1st of October 2016 to the 20th of February 2019, the cost broken under that category is as follows. Cost of outstanding professional fees foreign, $18,005.20. Cost of professional fees local counsel, $34,500, being a total cost of $52,505.20 TT dollars. Cost of professional services October 2016 to February 2019. Cost of foreign legal counsel, $2,850,681.64. Cost of professional fees on the accounting side at the DPP's office, $79,285,284.62, giving a total accumulation of $82,135,966.26. There were further costs. Total cost of professional fees, foreign and local, and DPP fees for the period October 2016 to February 2019, aggregating the two sums, $82,188,471.46. There was a final cost of monthly rental and call charges from TSTT, again 2016 to 2019, giving us $8,450.65. The grand total for that period, 2016 to 2019, is $82,196,922.11. And that, Madam Speaker, stands on top of the $109,338,997,000.54 being the previous costs that we reported to this House in the paper entitled Breakdown of Expenses, laid on October 1st, 2016.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Attorney General, surely it's not lost on you that we have incurred almost $200 million in legal fees. Is there some type of deadline or timeline when this matter will come to an end or will bring some resolution or result of one kind or another?
Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, I think the honourable member has, of course, asked a very germane and important question on behalf of every tax-paying person in Trinidad and Tobago. This matter can only be answered by the respectable and honourable DPP. It lies squarely in his domain. These over $200 million costs, legal and accounting costs and some ancillary costs, but they also stand on top of other costs. For instance, litigation at the central bank, other ancillary pieces of litigation, which would take us to several $100 million more. So this entire bill, I dare say, has crossed close to $500 million. And therefore, that question really, and that's just a conservative estimate, I don't have the exact figures, but there are several satellite aspects. I understand from the DPP that he is close to completion of his matters. We, of course, don't ask questions that we are not allowed to ask at the executive arm, particularly the Office of the Attorney General. And we trust that the DPP is in charge of what he is doing, and we expect that he will no doubt do what he must with alacrity.
Supplementary member for Orpuchis. Member for Orpuchis.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Question number 109 to the Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Madam Speaker, to date, 57 checks have been prepared, 48 checks were distributed, with 9 yet to be collected by the affected persons.
Supplemental.
Question.
Member for Orpuchis.
Yeah. Question number 110 to the Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm advised that it does not.
Supplemental. Member for Orpuchis.
Can I ask the Minister of Finance whether that advice came from the central bank or from the banking and investment community? Where did that advice come from?
Minister of Finance.
From the technocrats at the Ministry of Finance, who would have consulted with all available sources of information.
Honourable members, question time is now spent.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers.
The Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it gives me a sense of satisfaction on the statement that I'm about to make, particularly on such an important day as International Women's Day. Madam Speaker, I am authorized by the Cabinet to make this statement. For far too long, victims of sexual harassment in the workplace have borne pain and suffering in silence as the perpetrators of this disgraceful and unacceptable behavior have utilized intimidation, victim shaming, and abuse of power to get away with it without facing any sanction or penalty. However, Madam Speaker, those days are over. Today, it is my privilege to stand here and deliver this statement on the National Workplace Policy on Sexual Harassment 2019. I turn to the consultative process. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Labour and Small Enterprise Development began the consultative process in respect of this policy with national stakeholder consultations on the draft National Workplace Policy on Sexual Harassment in Trinidad on the 1st of June 2018 and in Tobago on the 22nd of June 2018. The consultative process provided a platform for multi-party stakeholders to share thoughts on the draft national policy and to discuss the pervasive issue of sexual harassment in the workplace and its impact on the industrial relations climate in Trinidad and Tobago. Stakeholders who contributed to the development and finalization of this policy included employees, trade unions, employer representatives, government representatives, representatives of statutory agencies, representatives of non-governmental agencies, citizens, students, and persons who identify themselves as survivors of sexual harassment in the workplace. Madam Speaker, 90% of the stakeholders in attendance at the consultations agreed with the areas identified in the policy. 95.5% indicated that they believe that the policy can effect positive change in the workplace. The recommendations, suggestions, and comments of stakeholders were carefully considered in the finalization of the National Workplace Policy on Sexual Harassment 2019. And I take the opportunity, Madam Speaker, to thank each and every one who has contributed to the National Workplace Policy on Sexual Harassment 2019. Madam Speaker, in particular, the team at the Ministry of Labour and Small Enterprise Development, led by our hard-working Permanent Secretary, Ms. Natalie Willis, among our Chief Labour Relations Officer, Mr. Bina Gomez, our Senior Legal Officer, Ms. Sangita Bundu, and the rest of the team. The context of the policy. Madam Speaker, sexual harassment is a violation of fundamental human rights, and it adversely affects the working environment, undermines gender equality at work, creates unfair practices in employment, and negatively impacts the dignity and well-being of workers. The National Women's Health Survey for Trinidad and Tobago 2017, commissioned by Caribbean Deaf Trends and the Inter-American Development Bank, identified that 13% of women experience sexual harassment at work, on the job, in public transport and public spaces, with the highest prevalence of this type of harassment being in the form of electronic messages with sexual content, 8%, and being grouped in a public space, 7%. The survey also suggested that in certain instances, as many as 84% of sexual harassment experiences were unreported. Madam President, just a snapshot of the policy itself. The objective of the policy is to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace, identify and address relevant issues, and provide guidance on actions that may be taken by stakeholders in addressing this issue. Madam Speaker, one of the most important elements of the policy is that it clarifies the ambiguity of what is sexual harassment in Trinidad and Tobago by setting out definitions, identifying core values and aims, amongst other important concepts, and identifying the actions we can all take in our roles at the workplace to address this issue. Sexual harassment, Madam Speaker, is any physical, verbal, or non-verbal conduct of a sexual nature and other conduct affecting the dignity of women and men, which is unwelcomed, unreasonable, and offensive to the recipient, and a person's rejection of or submission to such conduct is used explicitly or implicitly as a basis for a decision which affects that person's job or hostile work environment conduct that creates an intimidating, hostile, or humiliating working environment for the recipient. In defining sexual harassment in our cultural context, the policy also explains that occasional comments or compliments that are socially and culturally acceptable and appropriate are generally not, I repeat, not considered sexual harassment. The perceptions in different contexts of what constitutes sexual harassment in the workplace are extremely diverse, but the key characteristic of sexual harassment is that it is unwelcomed and or unwanted by the recipient. Madam Speaker, sexual harassment can occur at all levels within the organizational hierarchy structure, with any worker or employer being a perpetrator or a victim of sexual harassment, which may occur via males to females, females to males, males to males, and females to females. The policy, Madam Speaker, applies to all employers, prospective employers, and workers, including household assistants, apprentices, and trainees of all forms of enterprises in the public and private sectors. The policy also applies to third parties, such as subcontractors, volunteers, patients, clients, including hospitality and tourism industry, customers, stakeholders of employers. Madam Speaker, it would be remiss of me not to recognize that migrant workers experience sexual and other types of exploitation, as well as sexual harassment at work. Migrant workers, and in particular female migrant workers, face several vulnerabilities, and I wish to make it lucidly clear that this policy applies to all workers, regardless of their society
Minister,
status.
Gentleman in the front bench, I'm being disturbed. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Oh, okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, time does not permit me to elucidate further into the rich content of this policy, and I urge everyone to access a copy of the policy on the website of the Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development and to study it carefully. In closing, Madam Speaker, I remind all of us of the words of an unknown author, and I quote, "Excellence is never an accident. It is the result of high intention, sincere effort, intelligent direction, skillful execution, and the vision to see obstacles as opportunities, close quotation. Madam Speaker, this policy is a tool that empowers all of us, and I encourage everyone to read it, digest it, and live it. When we are empowered as individuals, our nation is empowered. Finally, Madam Speaker, before I finally close, I take this opportunity to extend International Women's Day greetings to our first female president, Her Excellency Paula May Weeks, to you, Madam Speaker, the President of the Senate, Christine Kangaloo, all the female members of Parliament in this hallowed chamber and the Senate, as well as my sister citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Coover South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. In keeping with Standing Order 24-4, could the Minister tell us when, based on the laudable policy that she has just laid in this House, when will the report into sexual harassment at the Ministry of Sport be laid in this Parliament?
Allow that as a qualifying under Standing Order 24-4.
Personal explanations, introduction of bills.
Minister of Finance. Attorney General.
Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that an act to amend the Companies Act be now read a second time. I know the procedure is unfortunately inaccurate as printed, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to bring a very important bill to the attention of the honourable members of this House and also to the national and international community, because certainly all eyes are upon us. Madam Speaker, the bill before us is deceivingly simple if one were to reflect only upon the length of it, but is on deeper reflection something which runs to the root of our national focus and our international obligations. Madam Speaker, this bill seeks to amend the Companies Act, Chapter 8101 of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. That act is now nearly 22 years old. It is an act of Parliament, Act number 35 of 1995. It came into operation on the 15th of April 1997. And Madam Speaker, that legislation which we borrowed from the Canadian government, the Canadian corporation laws, has been something which has served us well. Let's put the aim of this law, its purview and perspective, into sharp focus. Trinidad and Tobago, as you know, Madam Speaker, signed on to international obligations via the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. That FATF-style regional body, or FSRB as it is called, models itself after the Financial Action Task Force. And there is a square obligation by the 170-plus member states, 190 in a different forum, 170-plus member states, to observe what we call the FATF recommendations. There are principally 40-plus recommendations, and there are several other observations which we must be graded against called immediate outcomes. There are 9 of them. Each of the countries around the world have agreed to have an assessment in the Financial Action Task Force arena. That assessment is referred to as a mutual evaluation. The FSRBs group themselves, decide an order of priority for the analysis and assessment of the laws of any one country, and also the efficacy of the laws of that country. That mutual evaluation report is published in the Financial Action Task Force plenary, as well as the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force in Trinidad and Tobago's case. Then one undergoes a process of action plan implementation. Trinidad and Tobago underwent its 4th round mutual evaluation in January 2015. In that 4th round mutual evaluation, we rolled up our 3rd round mutual evaluation with our 4th round mutual evaluation. The team of assessors came in January 2015, looked at everything from our national risk assessment profile right down to our compliance with the 40 recommendations plus and immediate outcomes. As a result of our poor performance in January 2015, we were put into something called enhanced follow-up in the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force regime, as well as something called the International Cooperation Review Group Analysis, or ICRG. So we were being monitored in two separate entities at the same time, and are still being monitored. On the one hand, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, and on the second hand, the ICRG grouping of the FATF grouping. In that process, Madam Speaker, we are obliged to give high-level political commitment, and then an action plan is forged and published in the FATF agenda. It is not in a public domain, it is in the FATF agenda. And as we take ourselves through that step and purpose of compliance with the action plan, we as a parliament have undertaken a significant amount of work. And if I may reflect upon that, to remind honourable members of the points along the map that connect us now to today's bill. We did, as members know, the miscellaneous provisions, mutual assistance in criminal matters, proceeds of crime, Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago, Customs and Exchange Control Act, that is Act number 2 of 2018. We did the Insurance Act, number 4 of 2018. We did the Anti-Terrorism Amendment Act, number 13 of 2018. We did the Income Tax Amendment Act, number 18 of 2018. We did the Financial Obligations Amendment Regulations 2018, published as legal notice number 183 of 2018. We did the Economic Sanctions Implementation of UNSCR Order for the Democratic Republic of North Korea. Similarly, the Economic Sanctions Order for the Republic of Iran. We did the Financial Amendment Regulations 2018. We did the Miscellaneous Provisions, Proceeds of Crime Act, etc. Further legislation, we did the Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters, Request for Mutual Assistance Regulations 2019. That's to connect the dots of what we've done already. We have, Madam Speaker, on this occasion, to now consider the square obligations observed in the Mutual Evaluation Report published in June 2016 by the Financial Action Task Force subsidiary group, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, which said, as it relates to companies and as it relates to entities, that Trinidad and Tobago has to focus on recommendation 24 and immediate outcome 5. What does that mean? Those two obligations, Rec 24 and immediate obligation 5, tell us that Trinidad and Tobago has to focus on unmasking what is referred to as beneficial ownership or equitable ownership. Now, I'd like to, for a moment, just give a small example that I gave a while ago to others, that beneficial ownership and legal ownership represent the two types of ownership one may have. Under the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, in the common law of Trinidad and Tobago, and finding itself in statute, the beneficial owner or the fair owner or equitable owner, those are the three names that you call them, trumps the legal owner. And the example I gave a while ago to the young men from Astor with us this afternoon is, your beneficial owner is to be found this way. If you give someone $1,000, you tell them, buy something for me. For instance, a pair of shoes, a school bag, a collection of things. That receipt comes back and it says that somebody else other than you owns the thing paid for. Why? Because you gave the money to a friend to go and buy the thing for you. Now, legally speaking, it appears that the person whose name is on the receipt is the legal owner, but in fairness, the person who gave the money to that person is the fair or equitable or beneficial owner. This applies in this example to the ownership of shares in companies. And the ownership of shares in companies is a materially important thing because, Madam Speaker, if you look to our obligations under the United Nations and our government's focus, if you're fighting a battle against the proceeds of crime, money laundering, if you're looking at hidden wealth, tax evasion, if you're looking at all of these things, you're going to find that money finds itself in three places. companies or corporate vehicles, cash or land. Those are the three ways in which you can put money. And therefore, knowing who the true owner of money is becomes a very immediate and important obligation. Madam Speaker, in dealing with the legitimate aim of this bill and in its proportionality, I want to put a few statistics onto the record. Companies in Trinidad and Tobago are legal individuals. A company has the power of a natural person. A company can outlive a natural person. A company can be given to different shareholders by the transfer or gifting of shares. So what are our statistics with respect to companies? I'm able to say today, we have 104,168 companies on the record. There's a registry of companies, 104,168 companies. Of that, only 86,190 are active. That means 20% of the listed companies are not active. Of the 86,000 odd that are active, total for-profit companies, that's limited liability companies that declare profit, there are 77,472 of them. And for-profit companies that are public companies, those listed on the stock exchange, etc., there are only 129 of them. We have in non-profit companies 7,958, and in external companies, that is companies that come from another jurisdiction but which are registered here in Trinidad and Tobago, we have 596. There's a categorization of some 35 odd companies that fit a miscellaneous category. For instance, they are nearly registered but not quite there because of irregularities. So, Madam Speaker, why do I put the number of companies onto the record? Because companies can be used to carry out crime. We remember, Madam Speaker, that Trinidad and Tobago found itself in the international press where $1 billion in cocaine was found in juice cans in a shipment port in the United States of America. $1 billion in street value. How did that happen, Madam Speaker? By the utilization in customs forms of a company in Trinidad and Tobago which was not in operation. So these smart criminals went to the company's registry, found the name of a company that was not in active operation. 20% of our registry is not in active operation. Used the name of that company and transshipped $1 billion of cocaine in juice cans. That's to remind us of how this company's bill applies to certain things. Let's go and let's pull more statistics, Madam Speaker. Let's look to the Financial Intelligence Unit. Now, under the Proceeds of Crime Act and under the Financial Obligations Regulations, which is subsidiary legislation under the Proceeds of Crime Act, certain entities must report suspicious activities or suspicious transactions to the Financial Intelligence Unit. They conduct an analysis and then they report it to the Financial Investigation Branch of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and then they go to work. Listen to the figures in Trinidad and Tobago as it concerns STRs, suspicious transaction reports, suspicious activity reports referred to as SARs. For the year 2015 to 2016, Madam Speaker, when we look to the number of companies involved in STRs and SARs, 149 companies in that period, 2015, they were involved in a suspected Trinidad and Tobago value, suspected transactions, suspicious activities and transactions, $270,000 million. 270 million, forgive me, I was looking at the billion figure in the aggregated sum. 270 million, close to $250 million in suspicious activities. 270 million. Listen to what these suspicious activities were. Attempted murder, breach of exchange control, Gambling and Betting Act, money lenders, corruption, drug trafficking, extortion, financing terrorism, human trafficking, illegal gambling, robbery, suspicious activity, tax evasion. 149 matters aggregating to over $270 million. Attempted transactions of that 270 amounted to 26 million, but completed transactions, take the 270 million, look at what was attempted and blocked, 26 million was blocked, completed 243 million. Let's look to 2016. 2016, 2017 for that year, 117 companies were involved in, hear this number, $14,526,755,649.54. 117 companies were involved in $14 billion of STRs and SARs. Exchange control, corruption, drug trafficking, financing terrorism, fraud, human trafficking, money laundering, suspicious activity, tax evasion. Of the amount that was completed, we had $911 million. So nearly $1 billion was completed as a result of the diligence of the FIU in its reporting and its procedures. $13.6 billion was stopped. Let's look to 2017, 2018. We saw, Madam Speaker, 87 companies, suspected TT dollar value, $134,200,762.54. 101 million of it was completed, and 32 million was stopped. Again, the usual headings: corruption, drug trafficking, money laundering, suspicious activity, tax evasion. These are the statistics standing in Trinidad and Tobago, where companies, a couple hundred companies, if you add them up, are involved in STRs and SARs to the tune of billions of Trinidad and Tobago dollars. That, of course, does not even include the $1 billion in juice can cocaine that I just referred to and the many years prior. So do we have an aim targeted at something which is a proper mischief? Yes. Clearly, there can be an abuse of companies in improper circumstances. But what we know is that these companies have legal owners, because companies have to file annual returns. Under the external regime in Part 5 of the Companies Register, you have to file an annual return called a Form 23. Under for-profit companies, you file an annual return called a Form 28. Under non-profit companies, you file an annual return called a Form 29. In that annual return, you're telling the country, by way of public registry documentation, who your legal owners of shares are, debenture holders, etc., only once every year. If there's a change in between, you don't report it until the annual return. But we don't say on that register in a public way who the beneficial or fair or equitable owner is, who the man who really paid for the transaction, who the beneficiary of the crime is. And therefore, when Trinidad and Tobago talks about who is Mr. Big, where is he to be found, Mr. Big can't be found by way of an open transaction, by way of a genuine abuse of a legal structure, because there is no written obligation, compulsory statutory obligation, to name the beneficial owner of your entity. Madam Speaker, this has a larger dimension. That is where we're talking about crime and local companies, including some external companies. But there are obligations that concern the oil and gas industry. Billions of dollars that we live on comes from the oil and gas industry. And there has been a genuine push for transparency of beneficial ownership by the transparency institutes that are around the world. And they have called for implementation of a transparency regime. So, let me connect the dots. The Financial Action Task Force, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, the United Nations Security Council resolutions, and Prime Minister Keith Rowley, in attending the anti-corruption conference as he did, armed with Trinidad and Tobago's commitment against corruption, to commit itself to the fight against corruption and terrorist financing, our Prime Minister, very early in this government's life, stated publicly for the world that we would be taking the battle towards crime, not only on the streets as we have done with an appointment of an aggressive commissioner of police and a capable Minister of National Security, etc., but, Madam Speaker, on the back as well of following the money. Now, this is also to be found in our obligations under the Global Forum. It is to be found in our obligations, in our bilateral treaty obligations, as we find them, for instance, in the FATCA reciprocal arrangements with the United States of America. So the national agenda and the international agenda in the current government and executive's agenda all coincide in saying we will go behind transparency as a tool to follow the money so that we can get to the real beneficiaries of crime. If you take the profit out of crime, you are now pushing the envelope. So, Madam Speaker, what do we look at? I can tell you, we looked at the laws of Argentina, Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Guyana, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Suriname, Uruguay, Venezuela. We looked at all of these laws. But, Madam Speaker, we went further. We looked at the laws in our own jurisdiction. If you look to Section 4 of the Companies Act, there's a definition for beneficial owner. It's a very limited definition for beneficial owner. Section 4 of the Companies Act describes it. Beneficial ownership includes ownership through a trustee, legal representative, agent, or other intermediary. But the Companies Act definition, as narrow as it is, can be broadened if we were to look, Madam Speaker, under the Proceeds of Crime legislation, Chapter 1127. Madam Speaker, may I ask what time I must end?
At 3:27:26.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If we look to the Proceeds of Crime Act, Chapter 1127, under the Financial Obligations Regulations, in particular Regulation 12, you'll see that there's a definition of beneficial owner, which is by far more comprehensive than that in the Companies Act. If we look to the Securities Act, Chapter 8302, again, we'll see Section 108, Section 130, Section 137, where we treat with the concepts of beneficial owner, beneficial interest. If we look to the Insurance Act, Chapter 8401, we look to Section 11, unit trust. That's the existing law that we have just dealt with by way of the amendments, which we sat together for many years to develop. If we look to the new Insurance Act, Act number 4 of 2018, which has not yet been proclaimed, but you look to Section 56, again you will see the beneficial ownership aspects done. So, we have this concept of beneficial ownership. It's recognized in the current law, but, Madam Speaker, it doesn't go far enough because the concept is not clearly defined to get to the ultimate natural person, meaning not a legal person like a company, but an actual living, breathing entity. We don't get to that person by way of public information. So what have we done? The bill, Madam Speaker, really speaks to just a few things. It's 11 clauses long. First clause, short title. Second clause, proclamation clause. This act shall come into effect when you proclaim it. Third clause, this act means the Companies Act, Chapter 8201. Fourth clause, to the 11th clause is really where we get to the meat of the matter. Clause 4, Clause 8, and Clause 11 are all interrelated. Clause 4 deals with the concept of share warrants, bearer share warrants, bearer share certificates. Clause 4 treats with that in the context of local companies, for-profit companies, etc., locally grown companies, whether incorporated as shares for guarantee, limited, unlimited, or non-profit, those 4 different categories. Clause 8 treats with external companies in the context of bearer share warrants and bearer share certificates. And Clause 11 deals with the regulations in Schedule 2 to the Companies Act. So those 3 clauses, and I'll come into the details of them in a moment, treat with the issue of bearer share warrants, bearer share certificates. And what does that mean to the average citizen? A bearer share warrant, etc., is simply something which is negotiable by the fact that you hold it. A dollar bill. You hold a dollar bill, it's yours, unless you can prove it was given or stolen. If given as a gift with return. But a dollar bill is actually a negotiable instrument. A bearer share warrant or a share warrant that is in the same category, share certificate in the same category, bearer share certificate, those are different categories or different species in law. A bearer share warrant is a negotiable instrument which is under the seal of the company, and a share certificate is a share certificate which is the bearer. He who holds it owns it. Now, honorable members will recall in the miscellaneous provisions legislation which we dealt with last year that we, under the customs and excise and control arrangements, manage the creature that is a bearer share warrant or bearer share certificate by putting limitations on how it is to be imported or exported. But, Madam Speaker, our Companies Act allows for bearer share warrants. Impliedly, it treats with bearer share certificates, and it does not disaggregate the local versus external entities. Now, Madam Speaker, I'm being careful to try and explain this in as lay a position as I can, because it's very easy to speak in legalese and just run on with the bill. So bear with me as I do this. Madam Speaker, I'll come to the sections in their particulars, but the first aim is to treat with bearer share warrants and bearer share certificates. The second aim, very important aim, is to put a mandatory provision that you must disclose who the beneficial owner is. And that beneficial owner is known for all categories of companies. That's the second aim. The third aim is to make sure that records are kept up to date and contemporaneously with transactions. The current law says if you change the ownership of a share, you don't need to report it until maybe a year later, depending upon when your annual return date is. So these are the three essential aims, added only by a fourth but a very important one, which is to cure a lacuna in the law. When we repealed and replaced the Bankruptcy Act with the insolvency and bankruptcy legislation, unwittingly in a previous parliament, we failed to describe who the official receiver was going to be. Now, under the Companies Act, if somebody has their property dealt with, for instance, a court were to treat with the cancellation of shares as we see in this bill, the remedy is to be found in Section 245 of the Companies Act. And in Section 245, it's where the aggrieved person goes to court and says, listen, you've mistakenly taken me off the register, you cancel my share certificate, I want to have it restored. And in those circumstances, when you're winding up or dealing with company property, you have to have an official receiver. And the official receiver, if you look at it under the Administration of Estates Ordinance or any other of the laws that treat with official receivers, that is usually seated in the Chief State Solicitor's Department. And therefore, in this bill, we propose in Clause 10, if I'm not mistaken, yes it is, to treat with the categorization of the official receiver. So let's go into the provisions of the law itself, Madam Speaker, and allow me to try to break this issue down. The first material amendment, as I mentioned, is in Clause 4. In Clause 4, we're proposing that we delete subsection 2 of Section 33 of the Act. And Section 33(2) in its original form said, no company may issue bearer shares or bearer share certificates. Notice the word warrant is absent. What we have done in this new addition, by deleting this subclause 2 and putting in a new one, we have broken down the manner in which the two species may be treated: bearer share certificates and bearer share warrants. No company may issue a bearer share certificate or warrant, convert or exchange those particular categories. And where the company has done that, we put them to commit an offense. Now, I'd like to say, in treating with the proportionality of fines and imprisonment, what we have done is to borrow from Section 319 of the Companies Act, and that is, Section 312 and Section 313 of the Companies Act, which is the general offenses provision, which basically say $10,000 and 3 years with a continuing daily fine of $300 per day. So we have kept the fines in tandem with the rest of the Act. I ask you to take note, Madam Speaker, I'm currently engaged in an exercise of revising all the penalties under the Companies Act because they are far too low. When we look to the Insurance Act, we look to the Securities Act, we look to other laws in Trinidad and Tobago, we've gone up in the gaming legislation, etc., $1 million, $500,000. The formula is a little too low under our legislation, but it's consistent on this occasion. Madam Speaker, we have provided in Clause 4 for the methodology, how you must treat it prior to the enforcement of your bearer share warrants, etc., law coming into effect, the prohibitions. We come to the next steps. 6 months after commencement, the company must give notice to the registrar in a prescribed form. If you fail to do that, there's an offense. If you have the notice issued, you must bring it to the attention of the persons who own the shares. They must then bring it in 6 months, within 6 months, and the holder can have that share brought in and converted to a registered instrument. For instance, if Faris Al-Rawi holds that share, I would come into the company and I would say to the company, here is my bearer share, I got a notice from you, transfer it or record it, and they'll just record the name of the person that owns it. What we have done is if you fail to bring it in, there's an offense, but we put in a very careful due process point. We say, look, if you fail without reasonable cause, then you are guilty of the offense. And that's well traversed in law as to what reasonable cause looks like. Subclauses 10 and 11 is where we put in the due process. The company, if you fail to brought it in, they know who you are, they can cancel your share by going to the court of Trinidad and Tobago. Not capriciously, not by act of another shareholder, by the High Court telling you, you must cancel the share. If you're aggrieved, you can go for the relief to be found in Section 245 of the Companies Act by saying, look, restore me, and you go to the High Court to treat with that. The new subclause 12 adds in the obligation to file the annual returns, and then we put in the ability to have that done on an immediate basis and then an annual basis. Importantly, in the subclause 14, we have defined a bearer share warrant, because it was not defined before, as a negotiable instrument that accords ownership in legal person to the person who possesses the bearer share certificate. The next clause, clause 5, treats with an amendment to section 177. And section 177 is the section in the Companies Act that treats with the records of the company. Under section 177, it's where any shareholder, any director can turn up at the door of a private company and say, look, I want my copy of the documents and I want it for free. I want the documents which I'm entitled to in the capacity as director or shareholder. For public companies, it's slightly different, Madam Speaker, as I know you're well aware. For public companies, you can access at certain points and then it can be provided to you. Otherwise, it would end in pandemonium if one could make demands in a public sector, which is regulated under the securities industry legislation. Madam Speaker, we propose in that clause 5 to also include a company which has issued share warrants, etc., that we must now disaggregate the information which is made public. You must register the number of share warrants or bearer share warrants issued and the date on which they were issued, etc. If we go to clause 6, Madam Speaker, we're looking at the provisions to amend section 190 of the Companies Act. Section 190 treats with access to records. The access to records, again, this harmonizes with the previous provision 177, which is the records themselves. It is under 190 that the access provision is actually given life. And, Madam Speaker, we're making sure that we include, very importantly, not only access to records under sections 177, 179, and 184, that's the current law sections, but also, as you see it in the beneficial ownership dynamic, section 337C, subclause 6. That's in a reference to the obligation which we treat with for the creation of a beneficial ownership registry, that you should have access to that. So that allows the directors, shareholders of private entities to have access to beneficial ownership in the home of the registered office. Of course, under the beneficial ownership provisions in the new Part 5A, in the other clauses which we'll come to, you have access to the public register which provides for it. Madam Speaker, the next clause is clause 7, which seeks an amendment to section 318. Section 318 sets out the particulars of what you must do to make an external company registered in Trinidad and Tobago. Let me explain that. If you have a company registered in France, if you have one registered in England, one registered in Uruguay, there's a mechanism to transplant that company from its local domain into the laws of Trinidad and Tobago by way of what we call an external registration. In the external registration requirement, Section 318 of the Companies Act tells you the information that you must produce to the Registrar of Companies for certification, and we very particularly added in, again, that the company resident in Trinidad and Tobago, for tax purposes, you must now prescribe and detail shareholders, number and category of shares, nominal and par value, etc. Again, getting down to the type and classes of shares. Because, Madam Speaker, you may have somebody owning one share in a company, but you don't know that that one share is actually the controlling share, and you have 90,000 other shareholders who are under the subjugated authority of the single shareholder. Madam Speaker, Clause 8 deals with the external companies treating with how they manage bearer share certificates and bearer share warrants. And what we do in the new clauses 333 capital A, by inserting that particular clause, we are providing the same methodology that we did for local companies, as I described earlier. The same notice to holders of certificates, the prohibition against the external company allowing for the issuance only in Trinidad and Tobago. Because we can't tell a company registered in England, don't issue that type of certificate in their jurisdictional laws if it's allowed, but we can say in Trinidad and Tobago. We take the process, inform the shareholder, have it brought in, re-register it in an open name, give them an offense for both the company and individual, provide the exculpation for reasonable cause, cancel it via the High Court process, and have it restored via the High Court process pursuant to Section 245 of the Companies Act in the circumstances where it may be just for the court to do that. Madam Speaker, the next clause is really Clause 9, and this is where you rock to the core of beneficial ownership as a creature of what we're doing for the first time in getting to who the real owner is. We propose, Madam Speaker, in a new inserted Part 5A. So Part 5 of the Companies Act treats with external companies. We're putting in a new 5A. 5A treats with this new beneficial ownership regime. And this beneficial ownership regime is very important. Let me part for a moment from the course and say what a beneficial owner as defined under this law is. It's to be found in the bill where we define a beneficial ownership, and it means the natural person on whose behalf a transaction is being conducted, the natural person who exercises ultimate effective control over a legal person or arrangement. In respect of companies subject to the Act, the natural person who ultimately owns or controls the company through indirect or direct ownership or control or other means other than public companies. If no natural person, then the beneficial owner is the natural person who exercises the control of the legal person. What does that mean? For a company that has one layer, you look for the natural person. One rank of shareholders who are natural individuals, who is the real owner behind that. For a company that has a shareholder, which is a company itself, we take care for that scenario by going through the second layer and third layer. So this is a penetrative analysis as to the definition of what a beneficial owner is. In respect of legal arrangements, we have also added them in to include trusts, the identity of the settlor, the trustee, the protector, the beneficiaries, the class of beneficiaries, etc., down to natural person. Why? We know in this jurisdiction there is not yet, as there will be as we propose, there is not yet a legal obligation to register trusts, and trusts may happen by way of operation of law. A trust may be wound into existence by way of something happening in reality. Madam Speaker, we provide the regime for how this is to work into reality in sections 337B onward, where we ascertain information. What we do in these clauses is we put a bifurcation of responsibility. We tell the company, you company limited in liability, you go and knock on the door of all of your shareholders. You send out notices to your people, and you make diligent inquiries to find out who the beneficial owner is. When you have done that, if you fail to do that, there's an offense for you. And of course, pursuant to the Companies Act, the existing law, 312, 313, etc., that's an offense if you fail to do those things. We then go the second limb, where we tell the beneficial owner himself, forgive the colloquialism, oi, if you are a beneficial owner, take notice that you too have an obligation to tell the company that you're a beneficial owner. When it happened in the past, when it comes in the future, you too have an obligation. And if you don't tell of that obligation, there's certain consequences on you. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? After you get the knock on the door or you get the oi, it means if you don't say that you're a beneficial owner, well, okay, you're no longer the beneficial owner. Because, Madam Speaker, what we provide in this is an extremely important subsection. Subsection 8 of the new 337B. Listen to what it says. No right or interest in relation to any share in respect of which a declaration is required to be made under this section, but not made by a beneficial owner, shall be enforceable by him. Meaning, you can't get nothing. Let me explain that. All people who have bought properties, assets, drug men, corrupt men, the Al Capones, if I borrow the US example, they will now have to go and tell the registry and tell their company, oi, I am a beneficial owner. But when they do that, they're going to be tripped because they're now going to be breaching other laws that they fail to comply with. But if they don't do it, they say, boy, now, I can't do that because I will surely make a jail. Hard luck. You are deprived of the proceeds of your crime. That little subsection 8 is nuclear in its effect, Madam Speaker. And I would like to say that I am particularly pleased that we are taking that. So the basic methodology in this is, oi, fess up. If you have nothing to hide, then there's nothing wrong with fessing up, because you can say that you are the beneficial owner. But you better get some good advice lest you trip the laws of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, the 337D, etc., we deal with, again, the time frames where the company issues transfers, that it must within 30 days of the transfer no longer wait for the annual return under Form 23, Form 28, or Form 29. Forget that, which is an annual event. 30 days within your transfer, you must inform. Fortunately, that is something which attorneys at law are well informed. If you're under a mortgage, etc., the statement and particular of charges require timeframes of that measure. So it's nothing that is out of the norm in terms of what we are doing. Madam Speaker, I turn next to Clause 10. Clause 10 is the anomaly of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Repeal and Replace of the Bankruptcy Act, where the inadvertent identification of the Chief State Solicitor as the receiver of property happened. It is a lacuna which we spotted and which we are pleased to now cause to be remedied by way of Clause 10 of the bill. If we get to the final clause of the bill, Madam Speaker, we are simply making sure that in Schedule 2 of the Companies Act, that we treat with the definition in the regulations to make sure we treat with the share warrant, because we couldn't do the primary law and not treat with the subsidiary law. Madam Speaker, it's hard to talk companies law in layman language. I've had the benefit of having practiced in the area for 22 years odd. I love the companies law, quite frankly. I genuinely enjoy corporate law. But I've done my best to explain its impact to the average citizen in Trinidad and Tobago, because it isn't that all of us have things to hide. It's that we must all be aware of our obligations, and we have to think outside of the box. This is adopting the Al Capone approach, where if I can't take it down for murder, I'll take it down for tax evasion. This is to deny people the ability to prosper on the law of trusts, where equitable owners may prevail over legal owners. I'll give the final example. Shakespeare and Shylock made the concept of equity well understood. The contract in Shylock's circumstance was, you don't pay me, I want a pound of flesh closest to the heart. That was the law, that's the contract. Time came, default, no money, knock came on the door. Where? Oi, where's my pound of flesh? The law had to be performed, but the law of equity came in to say, oh, it is not fair that you should take that pound of flesh just like that. Take it, but don't spill a drop of blood. So that's the example of equity prevailing over the law. It was born, of course, in the Chancery Division of the United Kingdom's court structures because there was an abuse of the letter of the law. We all know, without being unparliamentary, what they say about the law. The law can be. I can't even use the term. But, Madam Speaker, this is good law. There's a legitimate aim. It is proportional. It employs due process. I could take a sojourn, if need be, into the constitutional provisions and the law on constitutionality. Perhaps I may yet need to do that in the wind-up. But I'm pleased to say this is something that I think we would all welcome. It meets our international obligations. It meets our local obligations. It's been well thought out. There is ample precedent for the law in our own laws, as I've detailed, and in international structures. In those circumstances, I have nothing left to say then. I beg to move.
Honourable members, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Companies Act be now read a second time. Member for Caroni Central.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I take this opportunity to say a few words on an act to amend the Companies Act, which is really the Companies Amendment Bill 2018. As the Attorney General said, all 627 pages of the original bill was established in 1995, and we have had some amendments since then in 1997, 2012, 2013, and now we come again in 2018 to make amendments. These are important amendments, and the AG was correct when he said that this was an important bill. And I understand his argument that what he's trying to do is to achieve national objectives with a national focus and to meet as well international obligations. I will refer to only one thing that the Attorney General said, because it just struck me as I was listening. Of the 101 companies or so, 80,000 or more active, and out of that, when you take the years, you use the years 2016, 2017, I can't remember if you use 2018. Yeah. But basically, what you're talking about is about 150 companies. There may be some repetitions in that, and there may be some new companies, but you're dealing with less than 1,000 companies. And I think that if these are the companies that are involved in infractions, and it is possible to track those, it seems to me that you have the basis on which to track illegal operations based on the actual information that you have. So I would say that one of your responsibilities and obligations as AG, understanding the system within which we operate and understanding the independence of the various institutions and so on, is precisely to zeroing on these perhaps repeatedly offending companies or flagged
companies, be they active or inactive or brought into action in such a way as to be flagged. And on the basis of that, you can address some of these issues that are really issues of corruption in the society. And I am sure that you might be placing your mind in that direction. And I hope that you will be able to target some of these and under the law, in the system in which we operate, bring to justice those people who are misusing company law and misusing the system for unreasonable and corrupt purposes. Now, these amendments before us in the bill, Madam Speaker, are really about two things, and the Attorney General spoke to them. Shares on the one hand of various types, and beneficial ownership on the other. And on the surface, the objective seems to be transparency on the one hand and owner identification on the other. So who can really argue with that? If you own shares, let the world know, or at least give the world the means to know who owns it. If you own a business or have a beneficial interest in it, Madam Speaker, let the world know or give the world the means to know who owns it. This seems, in my view, reasonable enough, and on the surface, there is nothing objectionable, really, to these matters in the bill. But the question does arise, why are these amendments necessary? And the AG addressed some of that by talking about what we do not have in the law that allows for hidden transactions. And I want to ask some questions pertinently that relate to this matter. Is it that share ownership and beneficial ownership of business or a business interest were hidden and untransparent before? All right, now the AG says yes, to some extent, but I think it is important to understand the extent of that and how we have found out that this has been a problem for us. Is there a wrong that we are trying to correct? Is there something that has revealed itself as a problem and that we are now seeking to make right? I think those are important questions if we are going to make these amendments to the bill. Now, there are, as the AG himself pointed out and as the bill makes clear, there are registered shares. There are shares that are registered. So if you have shares in a public company, those are registered and available for public scrutiny. And in that particular matter, the SEC has oversight. Now, these amendments in this bill, Madam Speaker, do not speak to any of those issues related to public companies. But one may ask the question whether the SEC oversight is in fact vigilant and responsive enough based on the experience of Trinidad and Tobago, and whether the SEC oversight function needs to be strengthened, since we are addressing these issues here in relation to companies. But there are shares that are not publicly registered called bearer shares, where the owners of the shares, the owner of the share has a certificate of ownership in his or her possession. And if a bearer gives another person the certificate, if I give the certificate to my colleague here, he now becomes the bearer of the certificate, and these shares are transferred. And the issue there is that it is done so without public knowledge. Nobody knows, except because it is a private it is a private transaction. So I think it is important to understand that public shares are registered shares are public shares, and unregistered shares may be hidden or kept a secret. And I think this is one of the problems we are trying to solve here by making the matter transparent, Madam Speaker. Now, these amendments seek to register all shares, all indications of ownership, and therefore it is making all share ownership transparent, and therefore it eliminates the secrecy issue, and it eliminates the privacy issue. These are two factors that are eliminated in the amendments here in terms of transparent share ownership. All owners of shares must now, if this bill is passed, be publicly declared through registration. That is the net effect of the bill. Now, these amendments to the Act, that's to say the Parent Act, and through this bill, also call for public registers of beneficial ownership. That's the second part of it, the end clauses of the bill. This means that all ownership will now have to be transparently disclosed, whether it is a partnership, a trust, a shell company, or whatever it happens to be. Beneficial ownership will have to be disclosed, and this will also have implications for transparency, but also for taxation, because the real owner will now be known. So the question here is, how do you make everything transparent and open? And when you do that, you also open the door to make sure that you can't hide from taxes. Now, the question may well be asked, can there be objections to this? And would those objections be reasonable? And I want to raise some of those issues. Objections have been made to legislation such as these and clauses such as these in other bills, on the basis, first of all, Madam Speaker, of privacy rights. Secondly, they have been made on the basis of the increased cost of doing business. I think that is a matter raised, for instance, by one of the submissions of the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Objections have also been raised on the basis of scrutiny by the media. So people feel that if you have such a transparent and open process, you can find yourselves in a situation where you can have a media issue. Another objection that has been raised is on the basis of hindering investments and negatively affecting investment decisions. That is to say, if everything has to be known to the general public and all and sundry, and it can make it to the press, I might be more cautious about how I place my money and manage my investment. And objections have also been raised on the basis of opening up the potential for things like blackmail and kidnapping for ransom. That is to say, if you can come, as has happened in Trinidad and Tobago, we have known situations, whether this is hearsay, whether it is factually based, or whether, in fact, we have documented evidence of this. We have heard, for instance, that people have been able to acquire bank information on bank accounts, and on the basis of that proceed with criminal activity. Now, I raise these objections because they have been raised and they are in the literature, Madam Speaker. I am not raising them as particular objections that we have to these amendments. But I'm saying if we are doing a bill and we are raising the issue of transparency and full declaration of all ownership of shares and assets, then we must be aware that these are issues as well that we have to be concerned about. The question may then be asked, and the AG may ask it, are these concerns more important than the concern about transparency and the need for transparency and openness? I do not think so. I think we cannot say that we are for transparency in this country, as we say all the time, accountability and good governance, and then not legislate for it. I think we would have a problem of dissonance if we were to take that position. This bill is about transparency and accountability in the private sector and supports good governance in economic matters. So if transparency, accountability, and good governance are important, then legislation like this, which makes such a regime possible, is also important and worthy of support. But we must also ensure that it is good legislation which takes into account some of the issues that have been raised by others in relation to legislation like this, and that such legislation, when it or if it is passed, is not subject to whim or arbitrariness or abuse. Now, we talk about transparency all the time. I have a definition of transparency here which I would like to share, and which is a lack of hidden agendas or conditions accompanied by the availability of full information required for collaboration, cooperation, and decision-making. Now, if we use this notion of transparency, lack of hidden agendas or conditions accompanied by the availability of full information, etc., on these grounds, could we say that the politics of our country or any country is transparent? Is the conduct of public business by government here or anywhere else transparent? And is the conduct of private business in our territory, in our country, transparent? I think it would be hard to argue the case that it is on all of these counts. And I could use examples, but today is not the day for examples about these things. Transparency in this country, as indeed the world over, is a problem. And I understand the objective of the Attorney General in trying to address this issue in relation to the declaration of shares and the declaration of interests in companies and assets. Now, the real issue behind transparency is how do you hold people to account for the businesses or the business in which they are engaged. And this is the essence of the bill as it addresses the issue of share ownership and addresses the issue of beneficial ownership of an entity. How do you hold individuals and entities accountable for transactions and for the ownership of business? How do you insist on accountability from the real players? That is why the natural persons, there is a demand in the amendments in this bill for the natural persons to identify and declare themselves. Now, in today's world, many of the things which stimulate business and facilitate growth can also be used to facilitate, let's say, tax evasion. The AG talks about that. The whole emergence of offshore companies, for instance, which are quite legitimate and which continue to function and which have gone through various metamorphoses. The whole emergence of this industry was in fact for the purpose of tax evasion. That is to say, to use the loopholes in the law to evade taxes. The same businesses which facilitate growth can also facilitate money laundering. That is to say, turning illegal or illegitimate earnings into legitimate gains by using the company structure. And again, the AG talked about that, and he talked about the 150 or so. I'm using the largest number, it may be more companies. When you add up the different years that have been flagged as possibly, but not clearly involved in that. And also corruption, which involves the use of the system of legitimate transactions to make private financial arrangements for separate financial gain possible. So that the issue of visibility and transparency are very different. Things could be happening in the open and it's visible. And you have all of these happening and you can see and you can even talk about it and you can even understand what is happening. But visibility does not mean transparency. And the legislation is after transparency and open and clear declaration of interest. So not all transactions, therefore, are legitimate, and not all company business is legal. And in order to get away with illegitimate transactions and illegal businesses, structures have been created using existing law in order to get around the law. In other words, using loopholes. So this bill, therefore, is meant to close loopholes, force interest to be openly declared, and to insist on accountability by those who in the past may have used loopholes to hide the state of affairs. The critical issue, therefore, is whether the bill does do that effectively and whether it does it well, whether it corrects a wrong or solves problems which are legitimate and real, and whether it does address the closing of loopholes. Now, let us look at some of the clauses in the bill. So in 33(3), the issuance of and conversion and exchange of a bearer share becomes an offense. And a framework for compliance and penalties are outlined thereafter. Any individual or company who feels wronged in the process can take their matter to the court, Madam Speaker. And all directors are held responsible for company action. The question arises here, is there an issue of size and proportion? There are penalties, for instance, for the breaking of the law once the law is established. But should there be the same same penalties? For instance, the summary conviction involves a fine of $10,000, imprisonment for 3 years, and a $300 penalty each day until compliance. When you think of the profile of companies in Trinidad and Tobago, micro companies, small companies, family companies, medium companies, businesses, all of these businesses, as well as large conglomerates, I'm asking the question, should the fine be the same for all businesses? And would not the micro, small, family, and medium businesses be at a disadvantage in this situation simply in organizing their business? Can we really claim here that one law applied to every company is fair and that all companies are equal and therefore equal before the law? Can we legitimately and rationally argue such a case? And I hope that the AG will respond to this. He may have a response which argues the opposite of the question, the implication of the question that I'm asking. It is to be noted that this bill insists on corporate and company responsibility and that all directors are responsible for compliance. I note also that the process of registration of shares involves first the company and then the registrar of companies. the shareholder is held to compliance by the company, which can take him or her to court. The company is held to compliance by the registrar, who can take the company or its directors to court. I wonder if the bill before Parliament today does not seek, and I want the AG to explain this to me, does not seek to alter the relationship already established in law between shareholders, a corporate entity, its board of directors in the context of good governance practice. Because generally, the board is responsible and accountable to its shareholders. This is a bill which makes the shareholders accountable to the company and the board, and alters the structure of power in the corporate governance paradigm. So do we wish to weaken the power of shareholders in relation to corporate power, or do we want to ensure compliance for transparency and accountability? And is this seeming restructuring of power relations in the company, which will take place under this bill, the way to go? In other words, I understand the objectives, but will this achieve that objective? Are we not setting up an unnecessarily antagonistic relationship here between the shareholder and, let's say, a board of directors? What is likely to be the response of an owner in whole or in part of a company in which the board takes him to court? And what are the options for a board? That is notwithstanding my understanding that he can go for redress in the court as well. And what are the options for a board that is duty-bound by law to make a shareholder, to take a shareholder to court if he or she does not transparently declare ownership when asked? Okay? Now, the specific clause I refer to here is 410, and I'll just read it for you. Where the holder of a share warrant or bearer share warrant fails to bring in the share warrant or bearer share warrant to the company within the same time frame and as requested under subsection 7, the company shall apply to the High Court for the share warrant or bearer share warrant to be cancelled. And upon the court making an order to cancel the share warrant or bearer share warrant, the company may make any required amendments to its stated capital as a result of such a cancellation. So I'm asking the question there, are we creating a problem as we try to solve one, is the question I'm asking. The other matter I wish to comment briefly on is the issue of external companies. Clause 8 on page 6 of the bill deals with external companies. I know that there have been objections in some quarters to inclusion of externally based companies establishing residence here. I saw that in one of the comments of the Law Association, but I do not agree. I believe that all companies resident here should comply with local law, and I think that that is the way it should be. Because if you don't have local compliance, how can Trinidad and Tobago as a country achieve international compliance? And if addressing international crime is an objective of this bill, as the AG indicates, and as I think it is, I don't see how the issue of exemption of foreign-owned or foreign-based companies operating here can be even raised at all. Now, the third issue I wish to raise is the registrar and the issue of registration readiness as soon as the business of this bill is proclaimed. What are the necessary steps in preparation? What has to be done? Will the registrar be ready? What is the process of compliance, enforcement, policing, and management of effective functioning of this registry? So I think that is something that we need to have some information on. The fourth matter is the issue of beneficial ownership. Part 5A of the bill from page 10, clause 9, deals with beneficial ownership in companies, trusts, etc. With regard to this, the same penalties apply, and whereas the time limit for compliance in the case of shares was 6 months, the time limit here is 12 months, and 1 month after this, this law, Companies Amendment Bill, becomes law. In this section, and for the issue of beneficial ownership, the authority is the Chief State Solicitor. The issue of the exercise of powers under this law by both the Registrar and the Chief State Solicitor seems somewhat uncertain in my own mind. And I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that. What this bill seeks to do is, first of all, establish a central register to establish and update beneficial ownership of shares and entities in a clear, open, and transparent manner. Secondly, through a more transparent system, it seeks to address the issue of illicit financial flows to commit fraud, acts of corruption, tax evasion, money laundering, terrorist financing, and financing of the manufacture of illegal weapons, I assume, because it is trying to comply with the various international requirements. Third, to comply with the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, CFATF, and the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, requirements, which seeks to establish standards of transparency capable of preventing the misuse of corporate vehicles for corrupt purposes. But does the bill achieve its purposes? I do not think in its present form that it does so. The bill is well-intentioned, but in my view, it falls short. You may be surprised to hear me say this, but it does not go far enough, and it does not take us where I think we need to go, and I will give you some examples. If we really want to be transparent and establish a strong system of accountability, why do we not establish a central public beneficial ownership registry with free public access?
Currently, Central, your original speaking time is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to wind up your contribution. You may proceed.
Why should the Keith Rowley government shy away from that? Members may remember you mentioned that Prime Minister Rowley made certain commitments in 2016 in London when the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, invited him there. At that time, at that anti-corruption summit, that is what it was about, Prime Minister Rowley said that under his government, Trinidad and Tobago will establish a public beneficial ownership registry and promise the free and full exchange of information with international partners and open access to the public. Why not use the opportunity of this bill to do that? Show me how it does that. Okay. Because I don't see how it does that. What I understand is that you have individuals registering with the company then register it with the Registrar General's office. And is that what you are calling the public registry? How do I have access to it? I have to go into the Red House, you put it to our website? It's online and printed. Well, okay, if you can clarify that. Secondly, why don't we identify? Now, there is no threshold for triggering here, AG, and I assume that every share or every single transaction has to be identified. Because in some of these laws, in some companies, they trigger it at 30% or 20% or whatever. You know, what is the level for triggering here? Is it any transaction? Yeah. Well, if it's any transaction, then that particular matter is covered. So, but the issue of the registry involving the declaration of natural persons is critical, because there's another matter I want to raise. And that has to do with interconnected, or what the Minister of Finance like to call connected parties' relations in financial transactions. And the question is, how would this registry as you have it, and what I'm suggesting is a much more public registry, and will the issue of connected party transactions or related party transactions, will that be flagged in the system, or how will it become a transparent issue in the system? Because that is important, because you yourself said, AG, that a lot of these things are veiled over in secrecy on the basis of intermediaries. You didn't mention lawyers, but I mean, that's a fact. Law companies, trustees, all right, notaries, foundations, corporate service providers. There are corporate service providers in this country and elsewhere who specialize in the creation of shell and dummy companies, and that is their business. And all of these things, we need to find a way of tracking the interconnected party transactions. If you really want transparency and accountability, then let us pass good law that would trace the interconnected party transactions, that would identify the individuals, the natural individuals, as you are suggesting, and let us have the open book, okay? The transparent registry that is there so all may look, whether it is an individual person or whether it is the media trying to get information. Now, the Attorney General mentioned when he was speaking the TTEITI, Trinidad and Tobago Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. And AG, isn't there a gap between what you are trying to do and what they are doing here? I mean, aren't they way ahead of you in terms of the transparency requirements? And that, are we not somewhere behind there? And I wonder if you can address this issue of whether there is, in fact, a gap. Now, we had raised some time ago the issue of the connectivity of all of this legislation. The AG talked about some connectivity, and we still have legislation that has to be connected. And the reason I raise these connections with the different bills and so on, I don't have the time now to itemize the bills, is because while we want to meet the requirements of international compliance, and while we want to harmonize and make complementary these various bills, we also do not want the concern for transparency and accountability, which is real, and for international compliance to hinder the business of trade, investment, and development for our country. I raised that. The second thing is that I want to say that all the laws by which we are governed are based on the principle of innocence until proven guilty. And with a law like this, most people will comply and conform. The second thing I want to point out is that not all who fail to comply or conform are guilty. And that is why I raised the issue of small and medium and micro businesses, etc., and the fines and the requirements for each of those, because I don't think, given the society that we have, that all have equally the wherewithal in order to do these things, and some of them may need help of a certain kind. And we must not penalize the many innocent because of the few guilty. And I know that there are many guilty, which is why I spoke in my when I started initially, about 150 companies or so that have been flagged, and whether that could not be the beginning of the pursuit of what you call your funny follow the money thing. The other issue I want to raise is that there are laws that govern people in public life, such as integrity legislation and so on. And this legislation demands compliance in the public good from private citizens and involves private ownerships. So I raise the issue that privacy rights issues must emerge and that privacy rights must not be trampled upon. The issue of private space and public space is becoming blurred. And I don't think it's only in Trinidad and Tobago. I think it's all over the world. And we have to be aware of that in crafting and passing this legislation. Now, there are many issues that have come up in the past in this country and that are with us recently. So in the newspaper today, for instance, the Minister of Finance is talking about NCB's bids for GHL. And in the past, we've had problems with transactions involving even publicly held companies, whether that would have been Royal Bank in the past or TCL in the past or other companies, and they have become issues. And this raises the other issue of the power of the state in relation to legislation that has to do with private entities. And I do not raise this lightly, because there is a quietness in the business community today, even though the economy in the minds of many who should know and who should be able to pronounce is being run into the ground. And even though business is unhappy with the state of the economy, and the question does arise whether it is the power of the state that has instilled silence out of fear in the society. So, for instance, in the hands of the Minister of Finance now, there are issues involving several companies. And these things he has been patiently dealing with, which means that time has been passing. Whitco is one such company. Sagicor is another. The Republic and Scotia issue is going to be another issue. The Bank of Baroda issue is going to come on his desk. What discretion does the Minister of Finance have in these matters? And what implications does a delay, for instance, have on the market realities of a country? I won't go into more than that. I don't have the time, and it's an issue that could take an hour. But can the power of the state, I am raising this question, Madam Speaker, can the power of the state be used arbitrarily? And at whose cost? Okay, I have a card in my pocket, and I won't show the name of the card, but that person saw me and told me that not only had he been deprived of business by this government, but that he'd been warned not to apply for anything else. And he had been told that all his subsequent contracts, which were coming to an end, would in fact come to an end and there would be no reprieve. I say that without fear of contradiction, Madam Speaker. And I want to ask this simple question: to whom does such a person complain? What is the institution that will see that justice is done in this situation? And if the person goes to court, what do you think is his economic situation when that matter is before the court? starvation time. So I raise these issues, and I close by saying that we are a society operating under laws. And when we pass laws, we must pass good law. And we operate on the principle that the law is supreme. But we also operate on the basis that there must be equality before the law, accountability to the law, enforcement of the law, fairness in the application of the law, separation of powers, procedural and legal transparency, avoidance of arbitrariness, legal certainty, participation in the decision-making. That is why you have the court process and a justice system that works. And Madam Speaker, we are saying that this bill, we understand its intention both locally and internationally for compliance and for achieving transparency and accountability in the system. But having said that, we sense certain dangers here, and we need certain clarifications, and we are dealing with the culture of a society that we know very well, and on the basis of that, I rest my case on this particular bill.
Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 53, I beg to move that the debate on the Companies Amendment Bill 2018 be adjourned to later in the sitting.
Honourable members, the question is that a debate on the Companies Amendment Bill 2015 be adjourned to later in the sitting. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it.
Introduction of bills. The Urban and Regional Planning Profession Bill 2019 in the name of the Minister of Planning and Development. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a minister.
Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, having regard to the interim report of the Joint Select Committee appointed to consider and report on the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority Bill 2018, I beg to move that the committee be allowed an extension of 5 weeks in order to complete its work and submit a final report by April the 5th, 2019.
Honourable members, the question is, be it resolved that the Joint Select Committee appointed to consider and report on the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority Bill 2018 be allowed an extension of 5 weeks in order to complete its work and submit a final report by April 5th, 2019. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it. Member for Port of Spain North, St. Francis.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as I rise to contribute today in a meaningful and intellectual manner, I understand that some down on the other side may not follow me, but they can try. I'd like to start my contribution today by wishing all of the leaders of our society, i.e. the women of our society, all of the very best, and to thank them for all that they've done for Trinidad and Tobago as we celebrate International Women's Day. Madam Speaker, this bill, although fairly short in nature, has very far-reaching impacts and is absolutely necessary at this time. Because, Madam Speaker, what this bill seeks to do is to deal with two major issues that we face. The first issue is the issue of corruption, and to address areas that are utilized by corrupt persons for the hiding of their ill-gotten gains, and the money laundering and the washing of their ill-gotten gains through, on the face of it, legitimate companies and means and transactions. So the first issue we're doing and addressing frontally by this bill is the issue of corruption. The second issue, Madam Speaker, that we're addressing, as the Attorney General laid out for us, is the issue of fulfilling our international obligations, and in particular our international obligations with respect to anti-money laundering, countering terrorist financing, and also fighting the whole element of corruption. And as the Attorney General quite rightly pointed out, and as the member for Caroni Central also pointed out, the Honourable Prime Minister is on international record as saying that this is a measure that we would take in assisting in the international fight against corruption. And that was done at the Anti-Corruption Summit in London in 2016. And I was fortunate enough, Madam Speaker, to be at that summit with the Prime Minister and to draft in collaboration with the Attorney General this country's position after having taken on board what our international allies and friends and partners were suggesting, including the FATF bodies, the IMF, the World Bank, and all of these international financial organizations, what they were suggesting needed to be done to fight this scourge of corruption. And just to let the population know, Madam Speaker, how it happens in our landscape here in Trinidad and Tobago. With the current registration of companies and the incorporation of companies, all you're required to do in law is to have 2 directors. So anyone can go incorporate a company, Company X, and put in place 2 directors who, to the face and to the world at large, are in no way related to them. And they can then transact business through Company X with these 2 puppet directors. In Trinidad parlance, it's known as the Uncle Bob concept. And persons who have ill-gotten gains and persons who are seeking to hide from the law very frequently and very often use this methodology. So, for example, a lot of the criminal element in Trinidad go and they have persons in corporate companies, they have directors who are, on the face of it, in no way associated with themselves. They may not even issue shares, because as our company law provisions are now, the law is that whoever incorporates the company holds the sole share until shares are incorporated. So now as law enforcement, when you're looking at Company X and you do a search, and it is a public search, to answer my friend from Caroni Central, the Registrar General documents and the documents filed at the the Registrar General's office are public. So you can go online and you can do the searches, and it is intended that this too will form part of that public registry. So when you go now and you search these companies, very often you come across 2 innocuous names, or 3 or 4 innocuous names that are in no way associated, Madam Speaker, with the criminal element. This is something we're facing right now as we investigate the gangs in Trinidad and Tobago. And in particular, Madam Speaker, the allegations that gangs are being given contracts throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Upon coming into the office of Minister of National Security, I immediately followed up on the work being done by my predecessor, the member for Point Fortin, and said that we need to focus on the gangs and we need to focus on their bread and butter. So if we cut out the financing of gangs and if they're getting contracts, including state contracts, and we manage to identify these areas and these means and cut that out, we would have cut out one part of their ability to carry out criminal activity. I can tell you, Madam Speaker, it is not as simple as that. Because when you search the public records, you're not going to see the names of the persons associated with criminal activity. You're just going to see Jane Doe, John Doe as the directors and the shareholders. However, the beneficial owner of the company and the person who is benefiting from the contracts and the financial gains of the company, Madam Speaker, are invariably the criminal element. So the only way you're able to get through and to find is by investigating and sometimes getting lucky and someone saying that Company X is really owned by someone who is engaged in criminal activity, and you then begin the process. This amendment, these amendments, and this particular bill and legislation go directly to attacking the heart of hiding behind the beneficial ownership of companies. So it will not only help us on the larger scale of sometimes people feel, as the Attorney General said, that Mr. Big is someone sitting large and sitting. It is that element of corruption, but also the elements of the gangs and the elements of the common criminals who are now utilizing the whole registration of companies to facilitate their criminal empires and to making them grow. But I'd like to say, in answer to something that Caroni Central said, the member for Caroni Central, they're also, and he would recognize this, they're also very legitimate means of having trust set up. In fact, when we agreed in London in 2016 to go down the road of having a public registry and to go behind beneficial ownership, one of the main topics at the time, and it had just broken with the Panama Papers, so of course there was a lot of illegitimacy there, but also you have persons, for example, famous people and movie stars at the time were saying they utilize trusts and beneficial ownership as a barrier and a protection to their privacy. Because when people want to know, for example, where they live, they want to know where their accounts are, etc., there are some people who are legitimately placed behind a trust and have a beneficial ownership behind the trust, and they were asking for some sort of protection for that. So the whole debate in London at the time, there were two sides of the debate, the Panama Papers as well as the legitimate side. So I want to put on record here today that there are legitimate reasons to have a beneficial owner structure. One of the things that were discussed at the time is not to have a fully public registry, because of course having a fully public registry would defeat the purpose of those who have a legitimate reason to have a trust set up or a beneficial ownership structure set up. But we're not dealing with that here today. I just simply wanted to put that on the record, Madam Speaker, that there are legitimate users. We are all aware of the international travesty or the international scheme, the international scandal that the Panama Papers were, and that in particular a law firm had set up and had become notorious for setting up these fictitious shell companies and for persons to hide behind the legitimacy of a company doing their illegal business and transactions, which may include the avoidance of tax, the avoidance of paying tax in certain jurisdictions, etc. There's the international debates taking place now as to where persons register for the payment of tax, etc. The only way you begin to close those loopholes and those gaps are by all of the major players in the world taking the steps that we are taking here today. So Trinidad and Tobago is at the forefront. We are one of the first jurisdictions internationally to be taking these steps in fulfillment of international obligations. At that same anti-corruption summit, Mr. Deputy Speaker, again, I was fortunate enough to be in a very small room, much smaller than the size of this chamber, where the world leaders, including our Prime Minister, who is the only person from a small nation, the only person from this region, from the CARICOM, from the Caribbean, who participated on the invitation of the then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, David Cameron, to participate in this anti-corruption summit. So you had, representing the United States at the time, the Secretary of State, Mr. Kelly. And I remember when he was pushing for the closing of these types of establishments, these fake trusts and these shell companies, and saying that is how we can fight corruption globally. When he was then confronted by some of the other leaders, well, how does America do it? Because one of the famous jurisdictions is Delaware in the United States. I heard my friend from Oropuch East, even before it had come out my mouth. It was new. It was Chagonas West, right? Jump out and say it. Delaware. And for him he then said that they too in the United States would have to take their steps. They have not done it as yet, but here we are in Trinidad and Tobago, leading the way and leading the charge. London as well was an area that was participating, and they have been pushing for an international and global registry, which is something that we would be willing to put our information in. because you see the real corrupt and large industries of illegitimate empires in the world spread it all over. And they have their money floating all over the world. So this type of bill here today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is Trinidad and Tobago's contribution to the international landscape and the fight against corruption on an international level. And it is us fulfilling the commitments we gave not only in London in 2016, but also fulfilling our FATF, our Global Forum, and our other international obligations in the fight against corruption. This is yet another step by this government. In fact, we're hearing the population say repeatedly, what is being done to fight corruption? When is the locking up going to start? When a person is going to be charged for corruption, etc.? As legislators, there's very little that we can do. That is left up to the police. The police are the ones who have the responsibility, and the DPP for the criminal charges, etc. But what we can do, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is pass legislation such as this that we're passing here today that will go a long way, a very long way, in the fight against corruption. So I agree that private business needs to be more transparent. What this does is it pushes it so persons can't hide behind the setting up of various companies, shifting money, as Carney Central said, all of the intercompany relationships and the insidious relationships that went on before without persons knowing who the ultimate beneficial owner is or was. This now deals with that. Another area that this would capture is in the whole property market. Because what you have very often are those who engage in corrupt activities, when they want to wash their money, wash their ill-gotten gains, very often a company is set up. That company then purchases the property resides in the company. And again, when you do the searches, you don't know who it is behind that company. The obligations that this legislation now puts on the directors of the company to say who the beneficial ownership really resides in are very, very far-reaching. And as the Attorney General said, they have a nuclear effect in the fight against corruption. So when you start to look at the bill in particular, the Companies Amendment Bill 2018, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to start by saying what it is it sets out to do with respect to bearer shares, bearer share certificates, share warrants, or bearer share warrants. The Attorney General quite ably explained to us what these pieces of paper are. So what they really are is pieces of paper that hold a value, have no name on it as to who is the owner, and literally you can go around the world or to the company who issues it, present it, and get the monetary value for it. So in the underworld and in the legitimate world and in the world of corruption, those bearer shares, bearer share certificates, share warrants, and bearer share warrants are invaluable in transacting business and passing value for money without persons leaving their fingerprints or paper trail, without you being able to follow the money, as they say. So the first thing that we do via this bill is we say that can be done no more in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is a huge step. So companies can no longer, once this legislation is passed, can no longer issue bearer shares, certificates, share warrants, or bearer share warrants. It stops that. But as I was mentioning to the Attorney General in passing, it always evolves. So now the whole cryptocurrency that has risen is one way for that type of illegal black market financing of illegal activity to take place. In the old days, that's what bearer shares and share warrants and certificates were. We now face cryptocurrency. So the acting Prime Minister was being asked yesterday in a post-cabinet press conference, are we considering it? And he said, without hesitation, immediately the answer is no. And one of the main reasons for that is terrorists use it for financing, drug dealers use it for financing and for paying, etc. And then those who operate in the black market and the underworld also use it. In the past, these bearer and share warrant certificates are what were used. We've now eradicated that and done away with it. And that's a good day for Trinidad and Tobago. What we've then done is we've said, okay, those that exist, because they were issued prior to this legislation becoming law, you have to now register it, and you have 6 months to do so. And if you don't do so within 6 months, we then set out as an offense and what are the consequences with respect to it. So again, that goes a long way, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the fight against corruption and the fight against illegitimacy, as we heard the Attorney General point out in the FIU report of how much suspicious transactions are really taking place in our small jurisdiction.
Honourable Member, at this time we'd like to suspend the sitting for tea, and we will resume at 5 p.m., of which you will have 13 minutes of your initial speaking time to conclude.